How's it going, everybody? I'm Andrew Robson, and you are listening to RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm a bonsai professional who specializes in deciduous trees, and I'm here with my co-host, who's a moderator on the bonsai subreddit page, a friend and a student, Maciek.
Hello.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about intensive classes, or classes that bonsai professionals offer, and why it can be beneficial to your bonsai practice at home. So I feel like you're probably the better person to talk about this than I am, because you're the consumer of the products. And so I'm just wondering, Maciek, why should somebody go to an intensive class? Why should somebody do in-person training? You know, these classes aren't always cheap. Why should they, instead of buying their next now Tokutake pot, instead of buying their next tree, why should they go to a class?
In a word, time. One of the biggest impressions I've had from my teachers and in seasonal intensive classes is good use of time is really important in bonsai. And once you've started bonsai, you begin to diverge from your ideal self, or you live up to the expectations of what you could become. And if you're becoming your best self in bonsai, you're using time really well. You're not wasting time working on crappy trees. You're not wasting time learning bad methods. You're not wasting a whole season not learning anything new. And a seasonal intensive kind of quantum leaps you in a single weekend or a single session into new ideas and a lot of very intensely experienced learning experiences. You know, you see things that you've only seen in video up close. You touch them with your own hands. It's basically, it's time.
Do you feel like when you learn things here in our classes, or when you study at Michael's, do you feel like you're getting a lot of time-saving techniques that you can apply on your own trees?
I am, but it goes deeper than that. It's actually, my impression is that outside of the seasonal format, I kind of not only didn't know bonsai techniques very well, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And my point to other beginners is always like, actually, bonsai are not by accident. Bonsai come from very specific techniques. It's almost to the level of
very intentional techniques.
Yeah, intentional techniques, to the point where the techniques themselves are almost like a technology.
Yeah.
Right? Where you wouldn't arrive at them by guessing unless you spent lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes guessing and doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So you're inheriting, when you come to an intensive, you're inheriting all of that refined, distilled technology, all the ideas that have worked and not worked in a single session. And it feels like that scene in The Matrix where Neo gets hooked up to some machine, and then suddenly within just a few moments he knows Kung Fu. It really is like that. I learned more in my first weekend of an intensive than I did in the previous couple of years of learning bonsai. And those previous years were hundreds of hours of video.
I've had a lot of students share that same experience. One intensive weekend, they feel like they've learned more than anything prior to that. And it was like that for me too. Like personally, like I had done study groups and workshops and all the things that you do as a person learning bonsai. But when I came out to interview for apprenticeship with Michael Hagedorn, that week that I spent at his place, just jumping into whatever work they were doing and doing that really intensely, I learned more in that 1 week than I feel like I did in the, years and years and years of previous study. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think I've also studied under Michael Hagedorn, not as much as you did, but one of the things that brought me to him was his advocacy for this concept of travel to the teacher.
Yeah.
And that rang really true with some ideas about the theory of learning that I had picked up in university, you know, that being in the presence of other people and having the pressure of doing well, even if it's all good vibes, wanting to live up to your teacher's expectations in person, wanting to live up to the expectations of even the lesson, that moment, are you paying attention? Did you really get what I said?
Yeah.
Those things actually matter a lot in the end. Even simple things like how we pat down the soil at the end of repotting and things like that.
Yeah,
my first session at Hagedorn's was repotting.
Okay.
And that I've always argued ever since, like, if you're going to do a seasonal intensive, a repotting session would be a good place to get in.
That's a great place to dive in, because that kind of sets up everything that we do in the rest of the year. I love my deciduous repotting intensives here, because if you don't get that right, if you don't get the roots and the root environment right, everything else can catastrophically fail in the rest of what you do. So it's fun to share that with people in the intensives.
Yeah, and going back to sort of knowing what I didn't know, beginners online especially are often asking, like, what is the next step with this nursery material? And my worry with a lot of things is that they'll immediately go in a direction that actually puts that tree offline for 5 years because they immediately did sort of the worst, wrongest things to it.
Yeah.
And seasonals are an amazing way to kind of just quickly ground yourself into the main line of what actually does make sense. What do people really do? How does this really go from season to season? And going beyond the repot sessions, you know, the summer sessions, the spring sessions, the fall sessions, you really get that whole breadth of the entire practice, the seasonal rhythmic practice across the entire year.
Bonsai is a process game, and I think, as you very accurately said, like when you come here to study versus maybe me come to you in a study group somewhere around North America, when you come here, you get to see that entire process and how it kind of manifests itself on all the trees and all the different stages that are out here on the benches. And when I'm traveling and teaching in a study group, you know, I'm able to provide, you know, top quality expertise on all the deciduous trees in front of me. But I can't say, well, you need to do this. Here's what it looks like over here on this tree. You don't always have that kind of in the room. So being able to just walk out in the garden and kind of experience a lot of those things, I think, you know, I always feel the best in my teaching if I'm like being self-reflective. I always feel the best after the classes that we have here. Because I feel like the students get the absolute most out of me as they possibly can. And that's something that's really unique about the intensive program. That's why an intensive program, or as Michael calls it, a seasonal, or I think other professionals might call it other things, but just in-person learning with a teacher, that's really, really huge for just experiencing all of these processes that go into making these beautiful trees that we have.
Yeah, going back to the word seasonal, I think we're also advocating for doing this kind of learning seasonally, precisely because studying in the same garden several seasons in a row, several different types of seasons in a row, a couple years in a row, you get to track trees. And I think one of the things that we're missing in bonsai generally is progressions. There are good progressions online, but they're not the kind of progressions that would teach you, like, this is the technique that was used at that stage. It's just like, here's a snapshot of the tree after I was done. You don't know if they did selection, they did thinning, they did this or that, defoliation. A seasonal, attended seasonally, or these types of educational opportunities attended rhythmically, is going to actually kind of just, it'll be like training wheels. It's like, oh, at some point you'll realize, I'm doing bonsai, the training wheels are actually off now. I'm part of this now. And then you start taking interest in certain trees in the garden, you track them from year to year, and then you start doing the same thing at home, and then you're a bonsai person.
That's all bonsai is applying those processes over and over again.
And I find it really difficult to chart that path outside of seasonal type of practices.
It's hard. You know, the other fun thing I think you get to see when you study in a place like this is how fast can trees really move when you're doing the right thing at the right time.
Even the stuff that's supposedly slow growing. You learn how to juice it or max it out.
We can say that deciduous trees are slow, and 20 years from an air layer, you might have something good if you know what you're doing. But when you start to see how these things unfold, it's like, oh, well, that really does look good after a couple of years of work. And even just a season can make a big difference on a tree. I like to teach it this way, I feel like in this garden, we're moving at 100 miles an hour on all the trees. And that's the benefit of setting up a system that's going to work in every kind of facet of that system.
Like every tree has been walked to 100% of its potential and then nudged back just maybe 5% to keep it in the safe zone. And that's the way it goes through the entire process.
That's right.
And like as a student, I've learned that like I have the license to do that. I have the permission to do it that way. That's another thing that comes up during seasonals is like you see what professionals... You see what their sort of contextual rule breaking is. And so you actually build up this really beautiful detailed model of bonsai that's outside of the simplistic model that's discussed online.
So rule breaking. So you've studied here quite a bit. What rules have I broken that have maybe surprised you? Not to put you on the spot, but
Repotting at odd times of the year is a good one. That's a classic one that everyone tussles over online,
Yeah.
right? Things of that nature, where we're taught very stringently, like never do this,
Yeah.
except that sometimes professionals always do that. You
Yeah.
know, and it's okay because of whatever you learn in your seasonal. It makes sense when
Yeah.
in the context of the seasonal.
I have one of my favorite things that Daisaku Nomoto has told me is he said very confidently, "I'm a bonsai professional. I can repot any day of the year."
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
said it with
exactly.
such confidence
Yeah.
that it's like, he's true. We do. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think in the more seasonal intensive, you're learning the appropriate time to do things.
Yep.
But, there might be a case that you need to slip pot a tree for an exhibit and
Yep.
you're repotting it kind of in July. And there's a way to do it and make it work for the tree. But yeah.
Do you know what else is kind of crazy about seasonals is I'm like a normal civilian,
Yeah.
and yet I've had my hands on some incredible trees.
Yeah.
Even in the very first seasonals I went to,
Yeah.
I put my hands on trees that mattered. And that's a crazy feeling. And then it introduces you to this idea that like really good trees are like a patchwork of people. They're put together by many people.
Bonsai's a community game.
Yeah.
That's why something like the Expo is so
Yeah.
magical, is because it's the assembly of that community in one literal place and time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't have like this tree behind us. If you're watching the YouTube, this tree was started by Gary Wood, who probably air layered it, and then Chris and Lisa Kirk at Telperion Farms, threw it in an Anderson flat in a raised bed for years. Now I'm playing with it. If I do everything right, then it goes on to someone after me, and there's no singular person in bonsai.
And students come by and help thin it or defoliate it or
this
pinch
tree
it.
has been. I had a student in one of the summer intensives thin this out and learn shoot selection and thinning, and so it's even though it's my tree in my garden, many people's hands have touched this.
Yeah. I think maybe I thought about this for a while, and it's like how do I become part of the phenomenon that makes trees that look like that?
Yeah.
And is it realistic for me to hope for that? And I just want to tell anyone who's out there that's listening that considers themselves like a complete noob, like zero knowledge about anything, but wants to be part of this. Like, I've been to many seasonals now. Every single seasonal I go to has at least one person there for the very first time.
Yeah.
And who have no knowledge, and everybody goes on to feeling like they have been propelled forward with momentum after that session, right?
Yeah.
And you can do anything. If I can do it.
And the thing is, everybody can do this. Like, bonsai is not a bunch of magic tricks that are hidden in the bag. There's no secret to bonsai.
No.
It's not all of these mysterious things that this one guy in Japan has figured out and nobody else knows.
Right. There's no secret to running a marathon. You just have to put in the time and effort.
You have to put in the time and the effort, and you have to train probably in a way that's conducive. And that's what I share with people in our intensive classes here is, here's how you can train. Here's how you can help prepare for this. I started this garden with close to zero bonsai. I think maybe 10% of the trees came through the gate of the garden as already being a established bonsai, that was matured by somebody else. The other 90% of the trees here, like this tree, looked nothing like this 4 or 5 years ago. And I can share, how do you take something that looks like crap and turn it into something that starts looking nice, and then once it starts looking nice, then we turn it into something that can go to a Pacific Bonsai Expo down the road and show really well. You're seeing that process play out here, and that's what I love sharing with students is like, hey, look, I'm doing it. I can help you do it too.
Yeah.
And here's the path. Here's what's working for me. Here's the process. Here's everything from repotting to fertilization to summer maintenance to silhouette design. Here's all of these steps that we're doing to make show trees.
Yeah. I should share one impression that I had when I first had my first seasonal intensive, and that was with Michael Hagedorn. I had the impression that I wasn't really being taught how to make trees from scratch. I was being taught how to finish already really advanced trees. And the longer, the years since, I've kind of realized, actually, no, every part of bonsai is kind of similar to every other part of bonsai. It's not as, here's your development stage and here's your refinement stage as I first thought initially.
It's not as simple as that.
It's not as simple as that. And both at that garden and in this garden, I see all the renewal necessary to learn how to build trees from scratch. Now I can see that.
Well, I mean, like I was just saying, a lot of these trees didn't come in here as already finished bonsai. So you're seeing the process that we take to realize them. But also, you know, and this is something that I think probably if you want to be a bonsai grower, you need to understand the end game way more than you can early on.
Yep.
And how do you do that without having experienced that end game?
You can't anticipate the lines that people will want, the taper that people will want, the nabari that people will want unless you've been in that environment. I think that's why I have a lot of faith in what John Eads is doing with his garden or his operation, his field growing operation.
Yeah, he did an apprenticeship working on, mature bonsai to a large degree.
I think that gives him a huge leg up in the technical, the really, really nitty gritty.
Because he knows where he's going and what to reach for, and that's a huge leg up, like you said.
Yeah, indeed. But I do feel like some of the most incredible progress I've seen has been watching trees from just a couple of years ago in this garden get heavily ramified and really progressed over a short period of time from what we would call, you and I would call raw material. Some other people would call them like trunks, like trunks with some line already there.
There's a trident maple here in the garden that, it was just a big pyramid of a trunk. I cut almost every branch off. This was back when I was living at Michael's. I cut every branch off. So I think you started documenting it there and have been kind of following its process the last 5 years.
It was just a simple, I don't know how to call it, maybe like a megalith, like a giant stone megalith.
Yeah.
And then since then, it's ramified just in an incredible way.
Yeah.
And that's one of the values of attending a garden and returning to the garden and developing, as a student, an interest in trees that are at the garden that you're studying at, because you see the time lapse. And again, like the time lapses and the progressions and the details of how they actually happen in real life, in the privacy of your own mind, is the only way you'll get good.
The frequency of coming back, I think, is important, because I'll have people who maybe took a class, 3-4 years ago, and then they come now and be like, "Oh, where did all these trees come from?" I'm like, I only acquire like 1 or 2 trees. Like I'm not building the garden. Like I'm more downsizing trees than acquiring trees. This tree's been here since the last time you were here and the time before that, but they don't recognize it because it's so radically changed in the time that they were here last.
So I would say seasonal intensives and attending them regularly, it sort of shattered the illusion that the trees are like they're kind of like they're not progressing in a way that can be noticed. They're like geology or something.
Yeah.
It shattered that perception for me.
Yeah.
Because I kept coming back and catching trees in the middle of putting out runners or in the middle of responding to a recent pinching.
Yeah.
Just in that moment, and then being able to ask, "Oh, what's happening here?" And you're saying, "Well, this one got cut back 2 weeks ago," and I see now.
Yeah.
I see that this is a call and response.
You see the cause and effect.
It's a game. It's exactly, cause and effect. I love that about bonsai. And once you have that in your mind, it changes everything, right?
Yeah.
From then on in.
Yeah. Is there anything that we talked a lot about the benefits of intensives? I'm learning from my students as much as my students are learning from me, and that's I think when you're in an environment like this, you're in an environment that's really conducive to want to get better, want to progress. What can be better about intensives? Like, do you feel like there are things that are lacking? What are the cons? what are
Yeah. I think maybe for me personally, there's still a hyper obsessive specific path of specific lessons I want to learn, and where there I would say, and this has worked well for me.
Yeah.
Be really bold and brave to ask your teacher to focus on, or to reveal certain things to you, or to focus on certain things that you are interested in personally. Like if you're interested in a particular species or a particular style, you should tell them up front. Because I've had nothing but
100%.
good results from teachers.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
but
that's one of the-
that can feel like oh, I've arrived at this intensive. The teacher only has these types of trees. Now I'm on rails and I'm stuck doing this. It's almost
Yeah.
like learning music theory is gonna shatter the
Yeah.
preciousness of my own feeling of their guitar, right?
Sure,
Something
sure.
like it's one of those silly
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
right? So it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you can choose your own adventure.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about the way that we do intensives here, and the way that my teacher Michael does his seasonal intensives is we have small enough class sizes that you can, if you say I really want to learn about ginkgos, I know you only have a couple ginkgos in the garden, but it's like great. I'll save my ginkgo work for when you're here. When we're doing book study, we can do an exercise on ginkgos. We can really kind of focus in. And if you go to a class with 10, 12 students, you might not necessarily get that luxury.
The student should not be an afterthought, right?
Right.
The garden kind of anticipates the students helping because this garden cannot happen without the students.
No, I'm a firm believer. There's no single person in bonsai. Like every tree is community based and oriented, and if I was just doing this for me in my backyard, it would be meaningless because nobody else could experience it and share it. And it might be good for me personally, but that's not bonsai. Bonsai is when it goes out into the community, when it goes on to a different generation, when you share it with others and get someone else as passionate as you are. I'm a firm believer that bonsai is community based.
Yep. The other challenge I think I would mention, and it's not a challenge for me, but it is always highlighted as a challenge for others because I am lucky enough to be in this area, is that not every region geographically has this kind of opportunity available.
That's right. I mean, you're lucky you get to drive 25 minutes across town and show up at a nice deciduous garden. We do have students that fly in from all over North America, but that's an added expense that is very real. It can almost be once you add up a flight and a hotel, you're double or more than the actual fee of the class.
Yeah, but if you buy like 3 fewer pots, 1 less trunk per year, you could go to at least 1 or 2
So do you think
seasons.
it's worth, would you advise to people, I know you're very vocal about supporting intensive classes and in-person study on Reddit and some of the other platforms. Do you think it's worth it for people to allocate their limited monetary resources on classes?
Yeah. I think education first, right? Because clearly we don't have enough. There's a supply and demand issue. We don't have enough good trees.
Yeah.
So, if more people just knew how to do this, then it would be easier.
Yeah. That's
the main thing.
Yeah. I've had a lot of students tell me that after the fact they've come to a few classes and they're like, I had no idea that I thought I hated beach. And now that I've come to a class and I've worked on a beach, I'm like, oh my gosh, I realize I actually really like that work. And once they've done it in person and experienced it, they're like, oh, well, now I want a beach. Or once they come and do the quality exercises that we do, they're like, wait, now I'm a better shopper. Now I'm glad I didn't buy that trunk, a year ago.
I'm smiling because for me it was chochubai. Chochubai was a profound, mind-blowing mind shift for me.
Yeah.
Like how
so?
Directional pruning and just the way that species is iterated and just watching the response every year and having a couple different windows of work just opened up a new style of bonsai to me entirely. And that's one of the things about going to a teacher that grows a variety of things, right? It really can open your mind.
Did you know that you would like chochubai?
No, not even remotely.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me. But then once I saw them in person, and once I saw what directional pruning could do, once I saw that whole...
you saw the process. You saw
the Morse code development on chochubai, where some years we do a little bit of wiring, sometimes we do scissor work, all of those things coming together, I realized oh my God, not only is this fun, but this produces incredible quality bonsai that are prize winning.
Yeah.
But the whole process is fun, the whole way through.
Yeah.
Right? And the way to see that is...
Whenever someone... It's always a pet peeve of mine when someone says, "Oh, I'm not going to have enough time for that."
Yeah, see you in 25 years. Ha ha ha.
See you in 25 years. I don't have enough time for that. I'm like, if all you're worried about is the end game, why are you even doing bonsai? Like
Right.
the process of getting through the years, the seasonal repotting, that's the fun stuff. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's of course going to I just came back from the Pacific Bonsai Expo. Of course it's nice to sit back and see your trees on display after years and years and years of hard work, and see other people's. Right?
That's like
But
the period on the end of a paragraph, and
that's
that
right.
paragraph is fantastic. It's
Yeah,
a good
yeah.
life to lead. You
Yeah.
know. Yeah, maybe that's the other thing about intensives or seasonal intensives is that you see what the bonsai lifestyle is.
Right, and it might be very different than what you've read about and seen videos of. It
Yeah.
might be a different kind of thing when you're here in person.
Yeah, like I like greeting the seasons as they come. I like getting excited about the seasons as they come, and
Yeah.
the seasonal intensive work that I've done kind of it puts those pins on the calendar for me.
Yeah, it's opening up the curtain that you might see in an exhibit when the trees really nicely kind of finish, and it's like, okay, here's all the nitty-gritty work, both the glamorous stuff where you're maybe wiring something and the unglamorous stuff where you're cutting off stubs. It's seeing that entire process kind of played out.
Yeah, that's going back to that. You have permission to do this, or you didn't know you could do this, but
Yeah,
you can do
yeah.
this. There isn't really that much downtime in the year
Yeah.
on bonsai if you fill
There's
up your
not.
time.
No, this garden is 100% on 100% of the time. There's always something that we can be doing to advance, improve, and accelerate the trees. And that's what's so fun to share to students in the intensive classes that we offer here. Other things that come to mind in terms of why you're exposed to a lot of beginners, a lot of newbies. Are there hesitations among them of, I would imagine an argument might be, oh, there's so much content. I mean, we're creating content right now. There's so much
Yep.
content online that I can consume, maybe this goes back to the point that you said in the very beginning, but about time saving. But you can watch hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of bonsai content from very capable people, and there's good and bad content, but there is a lot of good content out there. Watch one of Bjorn's videos, and you're going to get great information. But I've seen so many students who will come here and know 100% of the information, but can fail 100% in the application of that information.
Yeah,
And
I think it's a little bit like music in that there's a significant component of bonsai that is body actions, that there's an economy of motion. And if you, so it shouldn't be any secret by now that this podcast is mostly leaning towards quality and people who are trying to like kind of go a bit above average in their quality of their trees, right?
Yeah, and
in
I don't
their
care
skill
where
sets.
you are in the process. Like you could be a
get there.
complete beginner, but quality I think can apply to everybody. I want everybody to create the best, most beautiful trees that they possibly can.
Yeah, exactly.
And-
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and in our classes here, that's a way to help facilitate people to do that. So yeah, I think it's one of the most powerful things that we do as a business is offer the classes, because it's when I see people kind of on their when they come here, when they work on the trees, when they live the bonsai life, that is very much my daily life. It's kind of revealing, the secret behind the door, the magic of bonsai. It's not magic because for me it's just everyday daily habits.
Yeah, there's a
But
power
it's-
to seeing trees in 3D. There's a power to programming those motions into your brain, into your mind and your body.
Yeah.
As if it's dance almost.
Well, that's what you're not going to get in a video is I have a thing when I teach wiring is most people get tense when they wire, especially if they haven't done it much the first time. I see like their shoulders start to rise up, and I'm like, I feel like I'm like their yoga teacher.
Yeah,
and
you gave me that comment, and I was like, oh, it's just like my yoga teacher. Just lower your shoulders.
Just
and
lower
relax.
your shoulders, like shake out your hand, like relax. If you have a lot of tension in your body when you're wrapping wire on, that tension is going to translate to the wire, kind of choking the branch.
Yeah. And anything you repeat hundreds of times with your trees is going to show in the results of those trees.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, being able to catch something like that helps students relax. That's just one out of countless examples of how an intensive class like this can really help people.
I guess as a closing bit on that, again, I have to say there's so many things that I learned simply by just showing up and seeing what's normal.
Yeah,
Like, oh yeah, this is normal, or this is the kind of soil we use, or this is what the tool area looks like for a workshop, or any of those
Yeah.
things, or what time of year, or even details like, oh, in the fall, yeah, the leaves are still on, but let's go ahead and defoliate before we work on a tree.
Yeah.
The tree's not going to explode if you do that a week ahead of time. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you can do that if you want, right? Like
The things that maybe didn't seem normal, but you come here, you experience them, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that is normal. Like,
or
I can do
soil,
that.
soil cleanup, or
Yeah.
you use vinegar on a brush to do this, or just
Yeah.
thousands of
Here's
little
the technique of
details.
how I rub the brush to get the moss off a little bit
Yeah.
easier.
And a lot of the stuff might not be worth making like a engagement-seeking YouTube video for.
Yeah.
Or like a 2-hour
most of
lecture.
it's not.
Yeah.
Like most of it's unglamorous stuff, like just cutting off stubs. Most of it's
Yeah.
like, if you shake your toothbrush this way, it's gonna get the moss off better. Most of it's
Yeah.
not-
Or some of the comments I've gotten while I'm wiring of like how my hand is positioned, or whether I'm coming in from below, or when I'm
Yeah.
bonking something. Like, these are things that you will not catch yourself misdoing
yeah.
if you're just home alone, driven by a video, but other
Yeah.
people will catch that in an instant. They'll tell you, hey, wait a minute, go from
Yeah.
underneath, never
Yeah.
forget.
Yeah.
So that's the value of traveling to the teacher.
My last question for you to wrap this podcast up is, you've come to probably at least 2 or 3 years of intensives here. And if you've been to all the intensive, you've been to Repotting, you've been to summer, you've been to fall. Why sign up again? Why keep coming back?
I think because
Are you still getting added benefit?
I am, yeah. I think as I remain in bonsai, more questions pop up. And actually, the other thing is, it's like a process of getting more confident because of the things I learned last year and because of the results I then got at home, which makes me more confident that I can aim even higher.
Yeah.
And then I come here and I demand more from the teacher. And so now I'm kind of thinking, well, 2 or 3 years ago when I started here, I was like, I'm never going to have a tree in an exhibition.
Yeah.
And now you and I are talking about one of my cottonwoods being in an exhibition a couple of years from now. We don't know exactly which year, but sometime in the next several years. Now we're talking about it as if it's already a reality, right? We're working towards that. It's a totally normal goal. That's been the main thing of coming back, is aiming higher continuously, because seasonals build up your
Trying
confidence.
to pull more out of the teacher.
Pull more out of it, yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm trying to climb that mountain,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. And the nice thing about an intensive is you don't have to climb it alone. We'll figure
Right.
it out together.
Right. These are powerful training wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you've been watching the Deciduous Bonsai podcast on RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel. I'm Andrew,
I'm Magic.
and we'll see you next episode.